Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep on something I think a lot of you are curious about, and I know I am,
Oh, yeah.
microdosing. I keep hearing about it everywhere I turn, all this hype.
It's definitely a hot topic,
Yeah.
buzzing around.
Yeah, so what is it exactly?
Microdosing is basically taking a really tiny amount of a psychedelic,
Okay.
like think LSD or psilocybin magic mushrooms,
Hmm.
but we're talking a tiny fraction of a normal dose, like 5 to 10%.
Wow, so no like crazy trips or
Well,
anything.
no, not at all. It's not about tripping. It's about these subtle changes to how you feel and think day to day.
So people aren't like seeing sounds or tasting colors.
Nope. We're talking more like maybe a bit more focus, feeling a little more creative, or even just a slightly brighter mood.
It makes you wonder why so many people are into this whole self-optimization thing,
Right.
even in such small ways.
It's a fascinating question, really. I mean, we live in a world that's always pushing us to be more, do more, be better.
Yeah.
And microdosing seems to fit right in with that. It's like meditation or mindfulness, but with a little extra something.
Yeah. It's like everyone's trying to unlock their full potential.
Exactly. And it's not just about external achievements either.
Right.
Some people, they're drawn to the spiritual side of microdosing.
That's right.
It's like they're looking for a deeper connection, maybe with themselves, maybe with something bigger.
Yeah, there's definitely a history there too. Psychedelics have been used for centuries in spiritual traditions.
Exactly. It's like this ancient wisdom meeting modern self-improvement.
Fascinating. Okay, but does it actually work? What does science have to say about all these claims?
Well, the research is still pretty new, but there are some studies out there with some really interesting results.
Oh, like what?
Well, for instance, there's this study from the University of British Columbia. They found a link between microdosing and improvements in mood and mental well-being.
Really?
Yeah. And participants said they felt more creative, more focused, and generally just more positive.
So there is some science backing up all the anecdotal stuff we've been hearing.
Yeah, there's a growing body of evidence, but it's not all straightforward. There's also this study from Imperial College London, and they found that both the microdosers and the placebo group had similar improvements.
Wait, so people who weren't even taking anything felt better too?
Exactly. It suggests that the placebo effect could be a big factor here.
The power of belief is a wild thing.
It really is. Think about it. Even with an over-the-counter painkiller, sometimes just the act of taking a pill, even if it's a sugar pill, can be enough to trigger our body's healing mechanisms.
Wow, that's crazy. So how do researchers know what's actually from the microdosing and what's just the placebo effect?
That's a key challenge. And it highlights the need for more rigorous, controlled studies to really isolate the specific effects of microdosing.
That makes sense.
They're working on developing better research methods all the time.
I know we're talking about tiny doses, but can you, I don't know, describe what that actually feels like?
Sure, it's not like a full-blown psychedelic experience, right? It's more like, imagine having just enough coffee to feel a little lift,
Okay.
like a bit more alert, a bit more focused.
Yeah.
It's that subtle. You're not going to have hallucinations or anything like that. It's really about these tiny shifts in your mental and emotional state.
Like a nudge instead of a push.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you're enhancing your natural abilities without, turning your world upside down.
All right, that makes sense. But even with small doses, are there risks, like long-term effects we should be thinking about?
That's a really important point. Microdosing is generally considered to be safer than taking full doses of psychedelics, but we just don't have enough long-term data yet to definitively say what the risks might be.
So it's not a free pass.
Right. There's always the possibility of individual sensitivities or, interactions with other medications, that kind of thing.
Okay, so it's definitely not something to jump into lightly.
No, it's not a magic bullet. It's a practice that deserves respect and careful consideration.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're having this conversation.
Me too.
It's important to be informed and to approach this with both excitement and caution.
Absolutely. It's about understanding both the potential benefits and the potential risks and approaching it with an open mind, but also a healthy dose of skepticism.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground already, but there's still so much more to explore. Let's dive into some specific areas where microdosing is really making waves, like the world of psychotherapy. It's pretty amazing to think that microdosing could potentially become part of therapy.
Yeah, we've seen some promising research using full doses of psychedelics like MDMA and psilocybin to treat things like PTSD and depression.
Right.
And microdosing could be a way to access some of those benefits, but in a more gentle way,
Yeah, it's like a more approachable option, maybe.
Exactly. And it fits in with this growing trend of looking at mental health treatment differently.
Totally. It's like we're combining this ancient wisdom with modern therapy.
Yeah, and it could really change things. Imagine like microdosing along with talk therapy or mindfulness practices.
That's interesting.
It could help people see things in a new light, break free from old patterns.
I can see that. But there must be a lot to figure out before it becomes, a common thing.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking practical stuff, ethical stuff. It's a whole conversation.
Like, how do you even know how much to give someone?
Exactly. We need clear guidelines. We need to know what's safe and effective, and we have to make sure people aren't overdoing it.
And what about the legal side of things? Psychedelics are still illegal in so many places.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. We can't ignore the legal hurdles. And even if we overcome those, there's still the stigma.
Right. Psychedelics have a complicated history.
Yeah, and changing those perceptions takes time and education.
It sounds like we're still in the early stages of figuring all of this out.
Yeah, it's early days, but it's an exciting time to be exploring this, don't you think?
Absolutely. The potential is huge, but it's definitely not a magic bullet, and it's important to be responsible.
Couldn't agree more. It's about striking that balance between exploring the potential benefits and making sure we're doing it safely and ethically.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation. It's important to talk about these things openly.
Me too. The more we talk about it, the more we understand it.
Exactly. And hopefully that leads to more research and more responsible exploration.
Right, and who knows what kind of breakthroughs we might see down the line.
It's fascinating to think about how this one little thing, microdosing, is making us rethink so much.
Yeah, it really challenges our views on mental health, on self-exploration, on what's even possible.
It's like we're on the edge of a whole new frontier,
That's a great way to put it. It's exciting and honestly a little bit daunting at the same time.
for sure. Okay, so we've talked about why people microdose, the potential benefits, the therapeutic applications, but how about the practical stuff? What are people actually using?
Oh, right. Let's get into the specifics of how people microdose.
It's really interesting how microdosing is challenging the way we think about psychedelics. It's like we're rediscovering this ancient knowledge, but looking at it through a modern scientific lens. But I'm curious, what are people actually using when they microdose?
That's a great question. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the why that we forget about the what.
Right, exactly.
So the most common substances are LSD and psilocybin mushrooms. Those are the ones you hear about the most, both in research and just, anecdotally.
Okay, that makes sense. So someone decides to try microdosing. They've done their research. They understand the risk. They're going into it carefully. What's next? Like, do they just cut a mushroom into tiny pieces?
Well, it can be a bit more involved than that. The tricky thing is finding that right dose, the one that's small enough that you don't have a full-blown trip, but still enough to feel those subtle effects.
Right, right. You want that sweet spot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because the potency of these things can vary, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. It's not like taking an aspirin.
Definitely not.
Mm.
So how do people figure it out?
There are a lot of different methods that people talk about online in forums and stuff. Some people make a solution, like dissolving LSD in water or alcohol. Others grind up dried mushrooms and then weigh out very small amounts.
So it sounds like there's some trial and error involved.
Often, yes. It's really about finding what works best for you. But it's important to start small and increase the dose very gradually. Safety is key.
Absolutely. Slow and steady wins the race. It's almost like a personal experiment.
It is, in a
Yeah.
way. It's about exploring those subtle nuances of consciousness, pushing those boundaries of, how we understand ourselves and the world.
Yeah, it's like we're rewriting the story of psychedelics, moving away from the fear and stigma and towards curiosity and healing.
I love that. It's a powerful shift in perspective, and it's opening up so many new possibilities for research and therapy, for understanding what it even means to be human.
Wow. Well said. We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the science, the research, the personal experiences, even the cultural implications of microdosing.
It's a big topic, and there's still so much we're learning.
Absolutely. This conversation is just getting started. So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
I would say, stay curious, but be informed. Explore, but explore responsibly. And always prioritize your own well-being. Approach this with an open mind, but a healthy dose of skepticism.
That's great advice. So to our listeners, as you continue to explore the world of microdosing, remember, it's not a quick fix. It's a journey. And like any journey, it's important to approach it with intention, with respect, and with a commitment to your own growth and well-being.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into microdosing. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration into the world of knowledge and ideas. Until then, keep diving deep.